I was standing in my kitchen when it happened. The kettle was hissing, steam curling into the dim air, but my chest was pounding hard. Not from the heart problem my doctor warned me about, not from fear, but from the live stream playing on my phone. There they were, my family laughing, dancing, drinks in their hands. On a cruise ship, ocean waves were sparkling behind them like a postcard. Sasha, my daughter-in-law, was holding her phone high, shouting into the camera, "Family is everything." $31,000. That's what they had spent on this dream trip, and all I could think about was the conversation we'd had 1 week earlier, when they told me they couldn't spare $6,200 for my heart surgery. 2 weeks before this cruise, I had sat in a cold, quiet exam room. The doctor's voice was calm, almost too calm, as he explained. The left side of my heart wasn't working the way it should. The procedure could help. It wasn't optional, it was necessary. It would cost $6,200. I remember gripping the edge of the chair and thinking, I can handle this. I'll find a way. My savings were small after selling my house, but maybe, just maybe, my family would help. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Sasha and my son, Wesley. The air felt heavy before I even spoke. I told them about the diagnosis, about the cost. I didn't cry. I just asked if they could help cover the gap. Sasha leaned forward, her voice low, soft, like she was delivering bad news to a stranger. Now might not be the time, she said. She suggested natural remedies, lemon water, yoga, more sleep, less salt. She mentioned how expensive Ava's braces were. Then she smiled and said, "You look strong. You are strong. You can wait." Wesley didn't say a word. He just stared at the table, letting Sasha speak for both of them. I nodded slowly, pretending to understand, pretending it didn't sting. Inside, I felt something shift. It wasn't anger yet. It was a cold, heavy weight settling deep in my chest. That night, after they went upstairs, I stayed in the kitchen. The only light came from the stove clock. I wrapped my hands around a cup of tea, staring at nothing. I felt more alone in that house than I had when Leo died. I thought about all the years we'd shared selling my house so they could save for their future, letting them turn my dining room into a photo set, watching Ava when they were busy. I thought that's what family was, showing up. The next morning, I was walking down the hallway when I heard Sasha's voice. She was on a call, laughing. "The retreat of a lifetime," she said. "Matching shirts, legacy dinners, motivational workshops, $31,000 total." My feet froze. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. She wasn't talking about work. She was talking about a family cruise. A cruise they were already planning while telling me to wait for surgery. That afternoon, I canceled my appointment. Sasha smiled when I told her. "Probably for the best," she said. "Timing is everything." Later, in the quiet of my room, I picked up my phone again, and there they were on that ship, streaming to the world about love, togetherness, and how family is everything. I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred. I didn't yell. I didn't call them liars. I just stood there, watching the people I had trusted more than anyone celebrate an idea of family I apparently wasn't part of. And in that dim kitchen, with the kettle still hissing and my heart still pounding, I understood something for the first time. Family isn't who you share a roof with. It's who stands beside you when you're drowning. And right then, I realized I was drowning, and I was completely, utterly alone. After the cruise live stream, the house felt different. Or maybe it was me. Every sound, every shadow, every small reminder that this was no longer my home. It felt louder. It wasn't always like this. After Leo passed, the house was too quiet. Wesley and Sasha said it would be good for everyone. If they moved in, they could save for their future, and I wouldn't have to face my grief alone. At first, I believed them. I told myself it would be nice to have voices in the house again. And it was, for a while, but little by little, my life started shrinking. The garden Leo and I had built together, Sasha decided it would make a better backdrop for her photo shoots. She swapped the peach tree's wild blooms for perfectly staged planters that matched her brand colors. My dining room, she painted it white, called it minimal. I called it empty. The living room became her recording studio. Ring lights, microphones, backdrops. She called it content creation. I called it losing the heart of my home. I cooked, I cleaned, I watched Ava after school, made her snacks, and helped with homework, all while Sasha filmed herself in another room talking about family values to strangers online. Some nights, I'd stand in the doorway of the living room while she filmed, her voice bright, her smile perfect, talking about gratitude and loyalty. Words I hadn't heard from her in a very long time. When the surgeon told me about my heart surgery, I didn't tell them right away. I thought maybe I could just handle it myself. But the cost, it was just enough to make me hope they might care. I was wrong. After they said no, after Sasha gave her natural remedy speech and Wesley stayed silent, I kept going. Through the motions, meals, laundry, school pickups, like nothing had changed. But inside, something had. It was like my voice no longer carried weight in my own home. I could say, "I'm not feeling well," and Sasha would reply, "You look fine." I could mention missing my old garden, and she'd remind me how beautiful her potted plants looked on camera. One evening, I made dinner: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and fresh bread. We sat at the table, but it wasn't like the old days when dinner was conversation and laughter. Now, everyone had a phone in hand. I ate quietly while Sasha scrolled through photos of cruise excursions. I realized something: then I wasn't just living in their house. I was extra, background, someone they kept around because I was useful, not because I was wanted. The breaking point came a few days later. I was walking past the kitchen when I heard Sasha on the phone again. Her voice was bright, bubbling with excitement. "Yes, the retreat is booked. 31,000 for the whole family package. Legacy dinners, motivational workshops, the works." I stopped. She was talking about the cruise. Not a quick getaway, not a little trip. A massive, planned, luxury vacation, paid in full. The same people who couldn't help me with $6,200 had just dropped $31,000 to film themselves on a ship talking about togetherness. I stood there, leaning against the wall, the weight in my chest heavier than any diagnosis. Not just from the money, from the way they spoke about family, like it was some performance, like I was just the audience. That night, I canceled my surgery appointment. When I told Sasha, she smiled and said, "Good, probably for the best. Timing is everything." I smiled back, but inside, I knew something had shifted for good. Trust doesn't break in one loud snap. It frays quietly, thread by thread, until one day, there's nothing left to hold. And as I stood there, washing dishes in a house that used to be mine, I realized I wasn't just invisible. I had been erased. The night I canceled my surgery, the house was quiet, too quiet. Sasha and Wesley had gone out, Ava was at a sleepover, and for the first time in weeks I was alone. I made myself tea and sat at the kitchen table. The steam curled upward, slow and thin, like it was buying me time. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Maybe for my chest to stop feeling so heavy. Then, my eyes drifted towards Sasha's recording room. The door was cracked open. Her phone was still on the tripod, the laptop glowing on the counter. I don't know what made me walk in. Curiosity? Or maybe I was just tired of feeling like a ghost in my own home. The first thing I noticed was her content calendar open on the screen. Next week's theme: the power of honesty. I almost laughed, but then my eyes caught something else: an open browser tab with her store's dashboard. It wasn't private. It wasn't hidden. It was right there in plain sight. I clicked, and there it was: invoices, orders, numbers that made my breath hitch. $50,000. That's what she'd made in the last quarter, selling self-help kits, journals, candles, teas, the same teas I'd been picking up for her at the grocery store, the same candles I'd paid for when she forgot her wallet. She had built an entire brand in my house, using my kitchen, my electricity, my Wi-Fi, and me: free childcare, free meals, free space. And while she preached about family loyalty online, she wouldn't lift a finger to help me stay alive. I sat there staring at the screen. My hands were cold even though the room was warm. It wasn't just selfishness. It was taking over and over, without giving anything back. I closed the laptop, but the image burned into my mind. 50,000 in 3 months, 31,000 on a cruise, zero for me. The next morning, I called Diane. She'd been my neighbor for over 20 years before moving across town. She knew my voice well enough to hear the strain in it. "I need you to see something," I told her. She came over that afternoon. We sat at the table while I laid it all out: screenshots, invoices, and photos of the cruise posts. Diane didn't interrupt. Her eyes moved slowly across each page, her jaw tightening. When she finally looked up, her voice was steady but hard. "This isn't just emotional, Lorraine. This is financial. I nodded, even though hearing it out loud made my stomach turn. She leaned in. You have two choices. You can disappear quietly, or you can reappear on your terms. Her words settled over me like a blanket I didn't know I needed. For the first time in a long while, I felt the smallest flicker of something. Not anger, not revenge, just clarity. By the end of that day, Diane had connected me with Karen, a lawyer she trusted. Karen didn't ask unnecessary questions. She just listened, took notes, and asked for copies of everything I had. I handed them over one by one: receipts, screenshots, invoices. With each paper, I felt lighter, like I was putting pieces of myself back where they belonged. I didn't tell Sasha. I didn't tell Wesley. That night, I made dinner as usual, smiled when Sasha said the seasoning was good, nodded when Wesley asked about the mail. They thought I was still invisible, but now, I was watching, and I was planning. 2 weeks after meeting with Karen, the plan had taken root in my mind. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, steady, like water wearing down stone. I started by clearing a single drawer in my room. At first glance, it looked like clutter, papers, old photographs, and a small jewelry box. But piece by piece, I sorted what mattered. Documents I didn't want in their hands. Keepsakes I wasn't ready to lose. I didn't pack clothes. Not yet. That would be too obvious. I moved more slowly than I ever had in my life, because I knew now they weren't going to see me leave until I was already gone. Diane found me a small apartment across town. Nothing fancy. Second floor, beige walls, a little balcony facing the park. I signed the lease without hesitation. When I stepped inside for the first time, the air smelled like paint and possibility. I didn't tell Sasha or Wesley, not even. When I started moving things, one small bag at a time, tucked into the trunk of Diane's car, the only sound in my head those days was Karen's calm voice. Don't announce, act. Meanwhile, life in the house went on like normal, or at least, their version of normal. Sasha was already talking about the next big trip, calling it a family retreat. She filmed herself cooking, arranging flowers, laughing into the camera, about cherishing every moment. Wesley stayed quiet, eyes on his phone. If they noticed the empty spaces where my things had been, they didn't say a word. When my name came up, it was in passing. Oh, Lorraine's in her room. Or can you watch Ava while I take a call? I said yes to everything. Because the quieter I was, the more invisible I became. Invisibility was my cover now. At night, I worked on the real plan. It started with a name, the Lorraine Finch Foundation. Not charity, not handouts. A fund for women over 50 to train in trades: plumbing, electrical work, culinary arts, skills that could not be erased or dismissed. It was everything I had once needed. Back when Leo died, I felt the world closing in. Only this time, I would make sure no one could twist it into a photo op for likes and views. I set up the accounts with Karen's help. The money from my house sale, the part they didn't know about, went straight into it. The rest came from what I'd quietly pulled back over the years, the pieces they hadn't noticed slipping through their fingers. The day the foundation became official, I stood in my bare new kitchen and made tea in the only thing I'd unpacked: my old kettle. The steam curled just like it had the night I watched that cruise live stream. But this time, the weight in my chest was different. It wasn't drowning me anymore. It was keeping me steady. Sasha's voice still floated through the vents back at the house, filming about resilience, gratitude, and family bonds. It almost made me laugh now. One evening, she asked if I could record a few voice samples for her new audiobook. I smiled and said, I'll think about it. But the truth was, my voice was going somewhere else. By the time I carried the last box into the apartment, I didn't feel like I was running away. I felt like I was arriving. I unpacked only to things that first night: the photo of Leo, and a small plant from my old garden. A piece of the life I'd built now, in a place no one could take from me. For years, I had been the quiet background to their story, but now, I was writing my own. It started with an email. The subject line read, "Something you should see." It was from Penny Walters, an old neighbor from 2 streets over. We hadn't spoken in years. I clicked it without thinking. Her message was short, almost hesitant. I saw something online, and I think you deserve to know. She included a link. When I opened it, my breath caught. It was a cached version of the fundraiser page from months ago, the one I'd set up for my surgery before canceling it. Back then, I'd closed the page quietly, embarrassed. I didn't want pity. I didn't want the whole neighborhood knowing I couldn't cover the cost of my own life. But now, I was staring at two comments I'd never seen, both from Wesley's profile. The first read, "We appreciate the support." But my mother exaggerated the urgency. "She's doing just fine." The second, "Please don't send more donations. This isn't an emergency." I sat back in my chair, my hands cold. Not only had they refused to help me, they had told the world I was lying. It wasn't enough to ignore me. They had to erase my truth too. That night, I called Karen. When she answered, I didn't bother with small talk. "I have something for you," I said. By morning, she had the screenshots. She read them in silence, then said in her calm, deliberate way, "Let's make sure their version of the story isn't the one history remembers." 2 days later, she put me in touch with a journalist named Shayla Diaz. Shayla had covered local nonprofits before, including one of Diane's community events. When she heard my story, she didn't rush me. She just said, "Tell me from the beginning." So I did. The diagnosis, the surgery, the refusal, the cruise, the invoices, the fundraiser comments. She took notes without interrupting, but I could see it in her face, that same slow hardening Diane had when she saw the proof. The article went live a week later. It wasn't sensational. It wasn't cruel. It was honest. The headline read, "When Family Erases You, One Woman's Story of Financial Gaslighting and Survival." Shayla had included the fundraiser comments exactly as they were, side by side with my doctor's written statement confirming the urgency of my condition. She also interviewed 2 other women with similar stories, one whose son told neighbors she was confused to take away her say in selling the family home, and another whose daughter-in-law told a nurse she was just a former grandmother. Reading those stories alongside mine, I realized how common this kind of quiet cruelty was. Not loud abuse, not open fights, just slow erasure. The response was immediate, but not in the way I expected. I didn't get angry phone calls from Wesley or Sasha. Instead, I got letters, handwritten, emailed, anonymous, women from across the city, some from across the country, telling me their own stories. One said, "I thought I was the only one." Another wrote, "My children call me when they need something, but never when they don't. You've made me realize it's not just me." I read them all, every word. And then, I decided to do something with them. On the Foundation's website, I created a new section called The Unwritten, a place where women could submit their stories anonymously the moments their voices were dismissed, their memories rewritten, their truths denied. Within a week, the page was full. I read every entry, often late at night in my little apartment. The glow of the screen was the only light in the room. Some made me cry. Some made me furious. All of them made me certain I'd made the right choice in leaving. And through it all, one thought kept circling in my mind. This was bigger than me. Bigger than my surgery. Bigger than Sasha's cruise or Wesley's silence. This was about every woman who'd been turned into background noise in her own life, and every woman who'd decided, quietly but firmly, to turn the volume back up. The truth was out now. And it wasn't going back in the box. The invitation came in a cream-colored envelope. My name, full name, typed neatly on the front. No mom, no grandma, just Lorraine Finch. Inside was a short note. "We would love for you to join us for an evening of reconnection and reflection." It was signed by both Wesley and Sasha. The date was set for a Saturday. No mention of an occasion. I knew better than to believe it was about reconnection. If they wanted to truly talk, they wouldn't need an audience. And sure enough, when I arrived that evening, the audience was already there. Their dining table was set for 6. Sasha wore pearls and soft makeup, the kind you wear for photo ops. Wesley was in a pressed shirt I hadn't seen him wear in years. Beside them sat a man I recognized immediately, Greg, Carson's old boss. And next to him, his wife, perfect posture, polite smile. Jonah and his cousin Miles sat at the far end of the table, fidgeting with their napkins. Jonah's eyes kept darting toward me, then away. I took my seat without saying much. The first course came and went. Conversation was light, rehearsed. Sasha talked about the success of the foundation, carefully implying it was a family effort. Greg nodded along, clearly there to be impressed. When dessert arrived, Greg leaned back in his chair and said, "It's remarkable what you've built here. And I must say, your mother-in-law's early involvement really gave the whole project a heartwarming start." Sasha tilted her head, gave that camera-ready smile, and said, Lorraine was very generous in those first few months. But as the foundation matured, we felt it was important to streamline the leadership, Wesley added. Yes, it became necessary to realign the brand, especially after some confusion with the media. There it was, the rewriting of the story, polite, polished, and false. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I reached into my bag and slid a folder across the table toward Greg. He opened it. Inside was a single-page statement, with screenshots of the fundraiser comments, financial transfers, and the time-stamped edits they had made to erase my role. Greg's eyes moved down the page, his brows furrowing. When he looked up, his expression had changed. He didn't speak, he didn't have to. Across the table, Sasha's hand tightened around her wine glass. Wesley shifted in his seat. I pushed my chair back slowly. Thank you for dinner, I said, my voice calm. Then I stood and walked outside. The night air was cool and clean, a quiet I could breathe in. I didn't look back. Instead of driving straight home, I went to the foundation building. The lights in the conference room were still on. Diane was there, going over paperwork. She looked up when I walked in. You went, she said. I nodded. I went. On the wall behind her was the new Summer Literacy Initiative banner. Right in the center was Jonah's drawing from years ago, a turtle reading under a tree. The sight of it settled something deep in me. It's time, I told her. Time to move forward without their shadows. That night, we finalized the decision. Sasha and Wesley were officially removed from the advisory board. No more pretending. No more shared credit. The foundation would now be run by women who knew what it was like to be dismissed, and who had chosen, like me, to write themselves back into their own lives. 10 days after the dinner, the mailbox held an envelope with no return address. Plain white. My name is written in shaky block letters. I knew that handwriting. I didn't take it inside right away. I stood there on the front steps, the evening sun low and warm, and opened it right there, like my hands couldn't wait. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Not words, a drawing, a turtle, sitting beneath a tree next to a smaller turtle. They weren't reading like the one from years ago. They were just sitting together, looking up at the sky. At the bottom, in the same shaky block letters, were 2 words, still here. I sat down right on the steps, the paper trembling in my hands. Not from weakness, from something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Jonah hadn't called. He hadn't written a long letter, but he'd sent this. And in that small, simple picture, he told me more than any speech ever could. I carried the drawing inside and found a frame, placed it on the kitchen shelf, beside the dried daisies Diane had brought me months ago. Every time I passed it, the weight in my chest eased just a little. The days after that felt different. Not lighter exactly, but steadier. I threw myself into the foundation's work. We launched a sponsorship for children's healing retreats, nature walks, art therapy, safe spaces for kids recovering from surgeries or hard losses. No publicity, no staged photos, just quiet help. When the retreat began, the director sent a group photo. 30 kids in the back row smiling, and they're wearing a green sweatshirt. Was Jonah. He wasn't grinning widely, but he was there, alive, present, choosing to be part of something I'd helped create. That was enough for me. A few days later, I was walking to my car when I saw him, Wesley, standing outside the foundation building, hands in his pockets. He looked thinner, older. We stood there in silence for a moment before he spoke. He told me Greg had questioned the foundation's old paperwork and found inconsistencies. Sasha had gone to stay with her sister. He didn't know where Jonah was staying. I didn't flinch. I know where he is, I said, and he's safe. But I didn't give him more than that. Wesley searched my face for anger, for blame. I gave him neither. You made your choices, I told him. I made mine. He asked if there was any way to make it right. I paused just long enough to make sure my words landed. Not for me, I said, but maybe for your son. Then I walked away. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt free, because I had finally stopped trying to be part of a family that didn't want me. And I had found the one part of it worth keeping in a small, framed drawing of 2 turtles under a tree. By mid-August, the days felt longer, but inside me, things were finally quiet. Not the kind of quiet that used to ache. The kind that feels earned, like the silence after a long song where you can finally breathe again. I woke early most mornings now, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I'd walk the lake trail behind the old library, the one Jonah and I used to circle when he was small enough to slip his hand into mine without hesitation. I let myself remember those days without pain, just memory. The foundation kept growing. Diane had launched a mentorship program, pairing younger women in training with those who had rebuilt their lives after years of being underestimated. Every story reminded me why I left and why I stayed gone. One afternoon, a small bouquet appeared on my porch. Daisies and lavender, wrapped in brown paper. No note. I didn't need one. The scent alone pulled me back to a summer years ago, when Jonah had used his allowance to buy me a single flower at a farmer's market. "You always smell like peace," he'd said. I never asked what he meant. Maybe now I understand. That week, I was invited to speak at a women's luncheon hosted by the local business council. My first instinct was to decline. I didn't want to turn my life into a stage performance. But Diane reminded me, "You're not performing, you're planting seeds." So I went. The room was filled with faces: mothers, grandmothers, daughters, teachers, nurses. I told them about resilience that doesn't roar, the kind that stays standing when the people you love turn away, the kind that learns to speak again, not to be heard, but to be whole. When I stepped down, a young woman approached me. "You reminded me of my grandmother," she said softly. "She raised me, and I never got to thank her before she passed. But listening to you made me feel like maybe she heard it anyway." I didn't have words for that, so I hugged her. Sometimes that's enough. After the luncheon, I lingered outside in the late afternoon light. Under a tree near the parking lot, I saw Greg. He looked tired, but lighter somehow. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," he said. "Not for looking into Carson and Sasha, I stand by that, but for assuming your silence meant you agreed with them. I know better now." He handed me a folder. Inside were finalized documents, property revisions, the new charter for the foundation, and confirmation that every trace of their names had been removed. "This foundation," Greg said, "is going to outlive both of us. And maybe that's the point." We sat for a moment in the shade, not needing to fill the air with words. That night, I came home, made tea, and stood at the window while the curtain lifted in the breeze. The air smelled faintly of pine and rain. I didn't wait for the phone to ring or for an apology that would never come. I just waited for the morning, because in the morning, the work would begin again. And this time, all of it belonged to me. Weeks later, I drove to the bay, the same spot where Carson once talked about retiring together. The shoreline hadn't changed. Waves still curled in like slow, steady breaths. On a bench nearby, a little girl ran to her grandmother, holding seashells in both hands. The older woman bent low, listening intently, as if every word mattered. I smiled. When I got home, an envelope was waiting in the mailbox. Jonah's handwriting. Inside was a photo of him standing in front of a nonprofit office in another city. On the wall behind him was a mural. "You are more than what they said you were." On the back, he'd written, "Thank you for teaching me how to leave when staying would have meant forgetting who I was. I love you." I framed it and set it beside the turtle drawing. 2 pieces of proof, 2 quiet victories. And as I sipped my tea that evening, the only sound in the room was the wind brushing softly against the window. For the first time in years, that sound didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like freedom.